This is where it really gets fun, when you say the words, three words, but they're actually one, right? When you say mother-in-law, that's when it really gets fun. And it gets fun because it's like, the things in your life that you especially love are the things that were probably at once the greatest challenges for you. And so you've suffered them so much to the point where you find joy in them. And that's when it gets really good. I know this is a sore point for so many of us. And I think mother-in-laws in general just get like a bad rap, right? But I don't think it has to be that way, because I don't think anybody should get a bad rap, right? I mean, it just doesn't make sense, right? To just put these people in the category, this type of family member in that category, it just doesn't make sense. But I think there's a really easy way out of the entire mother-in-law struggle, right? To just literally to rise above that and just take yourself out of that whole dynamic. And really what that is so many of the stories that I hear about relationships with mother-in-laws, right, really speak of poor boundaries, as in I don't know where I end and you begin, right? And so knowing what really is my space and who I am, and being okay with, the fact that I feel a certain way, right? And that boundary is here, right? And then on the other side of that boundary, right? My mother-in-law gets to have, or your mother-in-law gets to have her feelings, her behavior, whatever, and that's her, right? And so being able to separate those two things, I think that's very key. And I think many of us women, because from a young age we're taught to gaze outward so much that it leads to sort of like this imbalance in that boundary, right? And so what happens is we become confused as to what is mine and what is somebody else's, right? And so to know very clearly, okay, I'm allowed to feel however I am, and she's allowed to feel however she does. That's her. This is me, right? And then to also, I mean, and I think that's a huge part of it, because that alone causes a lot of psychological disturbance for so many women. Like, the fact that my mother-in-law is upset with me, or she doesn't talk to me, or or for example, she behaves this way, like she had a fit, or threw like a tantrum, or was like went into rage, right? Whatever it is, right? Or was passive aggressive, whatever. And the reason that we take that personally is because this boundary here, right, it's enmeshed, right? It's not clear. And energetically it's not clear, because as women from a young age we were taught to please, right? We were taught to gaze outwards. And so that's why we become confused, as in we take somebody else's, and we don't even mean to do this, but it happens subconsciously, right? Because this is the programming that's running in our nervous system, in our brain, right? We take somebody else's behavior and we sort of, it almost becomes like our identity like latches on to their behavior as to mean something about who we are. And this is where it gets tricky. Like this is where it gets really tricky, right? So if your mother-in-law says something about your appearance, like, oh my God, why do you look like that? Or something like that, right? The part of us that would take that personally and be hurt by that, right, is the one that is our own identity, right? Which sort of like latches onto that and is like, if I have an identity here that, my personality is like kind of known to be, pleasing, chasing, whatever, there could be an imbalance there that I know of, right? If I have a personality like that, then it's very easy to see how, that would happen. Like I would take that personally and become really hurt by it, right? And so a very clear way that we suffer is we take somebody else's behavior personally, right? And so you might be wondering, to follow up on that situation, right? What do I say, or what do I do? Right? Let's say my mother comments on something, my mother-in-law comments on something about me, like, how I look, or, let's just use that for an example. And it's not so much, right? When we ask the question, what do I say or what do I do? it's actually, we're asking the question from the wrong place, because this boundary is really energetic. Like when we are present, we're not asking, oh my gosh, what am I going to say in the next moment? How am I going to carry myself? How am I going to behave, right? When we are present, we are in our heart. We are in our authority. We are in our true place. We're not bothered by, we're not taking somebody else's behavior personally. And in that same aspect, we also allow ourselves to be true to ourselves. And this is another way that I think women, profoundly suffer, right? Because from a young age, we have this tendency to please, right? And make somebody else happy. That includes distorting, contorting the truth about ourselves, right? So maybe it could be even my appearance, that I feel like, oh, I have to, if my eyebrows aren't done a certain way, or if my hair isn't done a certain way, right? Then I take that to mean something about me, right? And so if somebody else comments on that, oh, well, of course that's going to hurt, And so kind of visiting, like, okay, and life is so good because it's going to give you situations, right, where it's actually gonna help you awaken like the mistruths that you believe about yourself, right? So those mistaken, beliefs that you, like, those mistaken meanings that you've been giving to your appearance or your worth, or whatever else, right? And it's going to arise in the context of social situations. So that's one gift of life. And even though it is difficult and painful at times, right, even can be tremendously painful, right, the gift really is to work through the pain and just to look, right, to look. And the more and more you are present, right, the more and more you're here in your heart, the more and more, the less and less you'll be bothered by how somebody else is, right? Because you're almost unoffended by their truth because you are not offended by your own truth, right? So when you allow yourself to be true and you are behaving and carrying on as your true self, then you really can't get, and you don't get mad at anybody else for being their true self. That just doesn't happen in presence. Like presence is just peace. Like it's peace with everybody. It's peace with all. And so I know we ask this question a lot, right? And sometimes strategy is helpful. Strategy is useful. For example, my mother-in-law comes over unannounced. And in those times, yeah, it might be helpful to like have something, a script or something that you can say like, hey, like I'm really, really sorry, but if you do this again, like, coming up unannounced for us just doesn't work in our household. It just really throws us off. And whether you give a reason or not is completely up to you and what you feel is true for you, right? What you feel is right for you. But yeah, it just totally doesn't work for us. I'm gonna have to tell you, if this happens again, I'm not gonna be able to let you in, right? And you notice, right? I didn't lose myself in that. I don't think I came off as mean or cruel or unkind, right? There's empathy there because honestly, when you set a boundary, it's not an easy thing. It's really not. It's not easy to set it with somebody else. Like, it's not easy for you to set a boundary, right? And so, of course, there's empathy because when you're human, there is empathy. When you say no, there is empathy. There's naturally empathy. And that's a really, I guess it can be a relief, right, for all of us because that means you're in your heart, right? And also, if you're watching this, you probably have a level of awareness where you can also even attribute different, possible perspectives to your mother-in-law's character or to her behavior, right? Maybe she struggles with feeling alone, or maybe she's lonely, or, something else that makes her needy for social connection, or maybe she's trying to prove to herself that or prove to somebody else that she's a good, grandma or whatever it is, right? So there's a sort of even a compassion for somebody else's, motives behind, their potential, their behavior. But at the end of the day, when you embody your truth, even if that means you're nothing like your mother-in-law, and let's say your mother-in-law is extremely controlling, or she grew up in a household where she had to be exactly like her mother-in-law, right? Like that was their survival times, right? Like psychologically, to survive, she had to be like that. And so a part of you gets that, right? A part of you understands even that there was survival here that happened in my mother-in-law's life, right? Based on conformity, right? She had to follow her mother-in-law, or she had to follow her elders, or whatever it was. And so you can even understand when she, may utter even like a fraction, a share of, like, like a sentiment about that, like a fraction of like a sentiment of that with you, then you can understand, like, okay, like, she lives in that world, and it's a subconscious expectation that she holds now, right? Where because she had to do that, right, she expects me to also conform to her way. And now it's her survival instinct now, her programming, that is now causing her to behave in very rough, cruel, unkind, or manipulative ways in order towards me, because I'm not, I'm not conforming to her way. And so in your interaction with her, right, you can learn so much, right, about somebody's behavior, right? And even if you don't choose to, right, sometimes it's just like, hey, like I don't have the desire to even go there, right? But I can still hold empathy, right? And be like, hey, like, I'm so sorry, this doesn't work for me, right? And you are not obligated to first of all have a specific kind of relationship with her, right? You're not obligated to have any kind of relationship with her that doesn't feel true and that doesn't feel right for you. And so even having a very casual relationship with her, where you speak to her, say hi and bye when she comes, or whatever casual conversation, or whatever you feel like, right? Whatever arises in the moment, right? And it is just what it is, right? There's no pressure for it, right? It just arises organically. But sometimes, it's a good thing to sort of look at our own kind of expectations that we can be subconsciously, like, holding, like, oh, I need to have this kind of relationship with my mother-in-law, or I want it to be good, I want to make it work, or and sometimes it's so subtle that you can't even see it. So it's probably a good idea, just to visit that, if it comes up. And then I think, this whole sort of just being at peace with who I am, even though it's not what somebody else expects of me. And being okay with not being my mother-in-law's cup of tea, It's okay. It doesn't mean that you're not going to have you might have an awesome relationship with her one day. But really to be detached from that, and I think being detached from that in any relationship, right, is definitely healthy, because that's when, what's actually meant to be can be, right? When two people are embodying, authentically who they are, right? And if they come together, they come together, and if they don't, they don't, right? That's truth, right? And so that in itself is beautiful, right? Because there's space for that. You leave space for that. And all you need to do really is just be true. That's it. That's like the one thing. Just be true, right? And I think for so many of us, that part is hard, right? It's hard to be true. Because let's say our mother-in-law makes a comment about our appearance, right? If I were to be true, and maybe I would say something like, hey, like, that hurt me. And that's not an easy thing to say, right? It's hard to be true. And because it's hard to be true, right, we develop anger, right, or kind of responses that are just as cruel back, or like even if we don't say something directly, right, there'll be something brewing up here, right, for days, weeks, months, So I think the most important thing really is just to be true. Is to be true to you, and to be true to how you feel, and to be true to who you are. And if we can take care of that as women, right? I think this whole, like, we won't even be talking about, like, our mother-in-laws won't be a topic of conversation unless it is something that we genuinely want to, like, celebrate and talk about, just the it would just be the same with any kind of relationship in our life. Like, if I don't have a so good relationship with somebody else in my life, another person in my life, another family member, a boss, whoever it is, right? And I just generally wouldn't want to bring that up or even think about it. It'd just be like, and it's not like I'm giving that negative energy. It just doesn't come up in my mind at all. And so sometimes when something does come up in our mind, right, a relationship with somebody, it's because we are being asked to look at something internally, like within ourselves, right? And so to really visit that, and many times it's coming up because there's some way in us that we haven't been true, and to really find out what that is, what that missing way is, right? And to grow deeper in it, and hopefully have more the opportunity again, right, to be with your mother-in-law or whoever, right, and to sort of to do it differently, right, to be more true in the next moment.